Welcome everybody. Tristan MacDonald and Sue Hall here, and we're welcoming you to another episode in the second series of our podcasts. This series focuses on the Davis learning strategies, which in our view would be a wonderful way of ensuring that the challenges around dyslexia need not arise. And today we are incredibly lucky to be able to introduce you to Richard Whitehead, who's joining us from the UK, and he has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. So I'm just going to let him introduce himself and say welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Sue and Tristan, for having me. Who am I? Well, I'm the director of Davis Learning Foundation, which is the UK affiliate body of Davis Dyslexia Association International. And so we're responsible for training people to become Davis Dyslexia facilitators, for kind of moving things forward with Davis learning strategies and other teacher training. And we also have some involvement with the Davis Autism Programme. Alongside that work, for 6 years, I was what's called a Senko in the UK, which Senko stands for Special Educational Needs Coordinator in a private secondary school, a boarding school actually. And being a Senko in a boarding school is significant, is that you get to see the pupils whom you're looking after, not just in the classroom, but kind of round the clock, because we do evening duties in the boarding houses as well. So you get to sit with the pupils at lunch and supper. You get to see how they're doing their homework, as well as just the actual, daytime stuff in the classroom.
Did you train as a teacher? Like in the beginning, you just went into the school as a teacher?
Yes, so my original kind of university training was in languages. I studied German and Russian at university. And then for a while, I kind of touted my wares as a German teacher. And so that got me a foot in the door in the school sector. But then I figured that I really wanted to be a Senko. So I kind of did the training needed in order to do that. And then lo and behold, the position came up.
What drew you to the Senko Park? Do you know? Do you remember?
Yeah, I was already a Davis facilitator at that point, and I had been a Davis facilitator for about 12 years. But I wanted to get a feel for what dyslexia is like inside a school system. And so the role that I had still gave me 19 weeks holiday a year, which is essentially a bit over a third of a year, which meant I could still be a busy Davis facilitator, but then spend the remaining weeks of the year looking after pupils and getting a much more, I suppose, a more global insight into the reality of school for these children, as well as looking after their examination arrangements, liaison with classroom teachers, how one-to-one support is or isn't, can or can't be provided in a school setting, what are the limitations and what are the opportunities.
Well, that's really interesting. So am I right in saying that originally you were a teacher and then you became a facilitator and then you became a Senko?
Yes, that's essentially it. So I was a teacher, then I became a facilitator. Then I kind of took on a bit of German teaching while also facilitating to keep my language going and so on. And then this opportunity came up.
As a facilitator, you then thought it would be interesting to see what it was like when you're actually on the ground, when you're actually in a school situation and seeing how the challenges arise. I've not met anyone who's done that.
Yeah, exactly right. And so you discover all sorts of things. So one thing you discover is the diversity of different pathways that children go through in the process of discovering their own dyslexia. Yeah. So, when you're a Senko, you're the one that's doing the discovering. So there would be children coming to us who already had a fully fledged dyslexia profile. Right. But there are also children where their profile would be discovered as late as 14, 15, or in a few cases, even 17 or 18.
Wow.
Yes, there are still children in the system who can go through for 12 or 13 years of education, despite all of the progress that has happened in diagnostics, in detection, in classroom awareness, and so on, that will go through without being picked up. Typically, those are children and teenagers who perhaps have a very strong work ethic, and a lot of them are girls, and often the person's work ethic would then mask the fact that they had a difficulty. So I think the system works very well, fairly well, for picking up children whose difficulties have catapulted them down into the lower achievement areas. That will then send alarm bells going for teachers. But the kids that it's really difficult, I think, to detect, and that the system often isn't able to cater for, are children who might sometimes have quite stratospheric intelligence indicators. I was doing diagnostic assessments sometimes in these schools, and you would get kids whose visual or verbal intelligence would be up in the 120s, 130s, 140s. What that means is they're up in the top percentile or the top 5 percentiles of the population. Okay, so then if you can imagine a child whose In the top few percentiles, 97% of the population are less able than they are in their underlying visual and verbal ability. But in the classroom, they project as a kind of a B grade average student. Okay, so they don't qualify for any special arrangements, for any special support, because their actual performance is kind of suspended between their incredibly powerful intellect on the one hand and their learning difficulty on the other. And because they've got these two extremes and their performance comes through in the middle, quite often it's not noticed, particularly if they're hard workers as well, then it's not noticed that they have a learning problem.
Yeah. Richard, I couldn't pick up that bit about girls because I see boys as being very straightforward. It's not working. I'm out of here. I'm done. Girls are much more manipulative, in my opinion, and I can speak from experience. We'll find any way to make it happen. And I know that I got through school as a people pleaser. I would do anything to be that person who stood out for that teacher. And so I worked like a drain to make it happen.
There's a particular trajectory on that path that can be quite tragic. And so what I saw on many occasions was, children with that sort of profile, as we say, often girls, hard workers, who would kind of get through primary school and the early stages of secondary. So they primarily get through up to the age of about 13 on kind of coping strategies. In particular, rote learning. Rote learning is not a natural strength of a dyslexic individual, but if determined to work extremely hard, then to an extent you can make that work. The school I went to was 13 plus entry, so the children was coming in at the age of 13. And often these children would have been trained in their previous school to work extremely hard, to learn, repeating the exam format again and again and again. And then you get through with your kind of B grades and nobody realized there's an issue. But then once you come through beyond about the age of 13, the scope of what you're needing to learn broadens out. And as you approach what in the UK we call GCSEs, the public exams that are taken at age 16, it's not just about rote learning anymore, it's about combining what you know in order to answer questions in a more original way. And so then the coping strategies will often crash, but then the crash will be accompanied by things like exam anxiety, often extreme anxiety. So we had sometimes to look after pupils in the school in one-to-one invigilation in public exams, because a child simply could not get through an exam in the main examination hall. It would just be impossible. And so we would then put in what are called supervised rest breaks, meaning that if a child was panicking, we could stop the clock, take them out, have a cup of tea with them or whatever, just allow them to de-arouse and then go back in when they were ready. I did get to work with one or two of those children directly using Davis techniques. Now, there was a notable case where, I don't know if your listeners know about Davis Concepts for Life, which is the autism program, but for non-autistic individuals or people who don't self-identify as autistic. And so it takes people right the way through what we call the concepts. So we're looking at using the plasticine clay in order to master principles such as consequence, cause and effect, time, sequence, order, disorder. There's a whole series of concepts that deal with our kind of emotional mechanisms and how it is that our thoughts give rise to our feelings, changes in feeling create emotion, and so on and so forth. And so we went right through that. And then at the end of that process, this girl who was 18, she kind of played out. So she made herself in an examination situation. And then we went through, I suppose, what one might describe as a semi-therapeutic process, but using the concepts that she had mastered in order to pick apart what exactly was going on, what was causing what in that exam situation. And we got through that process just before what we called her trial exams, which are the kind of mock exams that you do 4 months before the real thing. And she said, can I go back in the main exam hall, but can you keep a seat for me for one-to-one, just in case anything happens? And lo and behold, the whole week went past and she didn't need the seat.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and this was somebody who in the previous exam season had had a complete meltdown, had to have, I think, almost an hour out of the exam room. Wow. Because, she was palpitating and so on. But this particular girl, right from the start, she had said her ambition was to take her final exams in the main exam room with no special arrangements. Yeah. And she fulfilled that.
That is amazing. So important for people to know how powerful it is when you model those concepts.
Yes.
I remember in middle school and high school, I really struggled with being able to prove that I can remember things on a piece of paper, but I showed very good verbal memory. So I have teachers come up to me and say, you seem to really know the material, but when you write the test or the exam, it's like you forgot a whole bunch of things. And what you were saying earlier, I could really relate to that. It was so true.
Yeah. What's also interesting is that the way that verbal ability is tested is actually links in very strongly with our picture thinking. Dyslexic individuals will quite often score well on visual ability and on verbal ability. That's often the strongest suit in diagnostic testing. You know, a typical question, verbal ability, would be something like, the Earth is to the moon as the sun is to the ... and then you have to complete. Now, what do you need for that? You need your picture thinking. Yeah, so you have these kind of contrasts, you know, skin is soft, bones are hard, and so on. And so a lot of this is actually picture thinking. Where the verbal thinking is tested, the word thinking is often on what's called phonological awareness testing. And that's testing where you have this sort of bizarre testing where there's a non-word said, like Guy Thluggy Black or something, and then you have to try and repeat it, and then they get longer and longer, and you have to kind of try and remember that sequence of sounds and regurgitate it.
One of the interviews that we did in our first series of podcasts was with a wonderful lady called Manda Fox Gillespie, and she is a mom who has two daughters. They both have dyslexia. The type of dyslexia is a little different. One of them is totally phonologically unaware, and she has done so much research on it. And just so our listeners know, if you go to that podcast, she has a wonderful description of the difference between phonological and phonemic and phonic. You really did have an insider view of the whole system, didn't you?
We're focusing here on Davis learning strategies. And what you get to see if you're working in the secondary system is you get to see what can go wrong in the primary system.
Right.
So you get to see the end product of the primary system coming through and it either working or not working. And the two most common issues around it not working, the first one would be the hard worker profile, who has got through with coping strategies and who has perhaps left primary school with false messages about what learning actually is. Okay, and those false messages are around learning is memorizing and learning is working incredibly hard.
Yeah, and being the best parrot, just regurgitating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then on the learning hierarchy, it's kind of low-level thinking, taking something in and repeating it as it is, as opposed to analyzing and synthesizing, which is very much a picture thinking attribute. And so these kids, they're putting their picture thinking to one side. They're trying to crank up their word thinking. They're trying to crank up memorizing, but through incredible hard work. And as I say, then that culminates quite often in exam anxiety and the system crashing around about 14 or 15. The other profile that very often can come through, and that quite often is a boy profile, but not exclusively, is head in the sand. And that is a profile where the message a person has taken out of their primary education is hide from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then maybe it'll go away.
And why does it matter anyway?
Well, that often comes later, doesn't it? Because that why does it matter anyway? That's part of the whole coping strategy.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going through education feeling incredibly confused, you will only be confused for as long as you want to learn. If you no longer want to learn, you're not confused anymore because you don't care. So if you kind of switch off your caring, then you'll turn off the confusion.
Yeah.
But it's tragic. What you then have is a person who's got their picture thinking intact, but they haven't learned how to use it in learning, and they haven't acquired the skill of breaking things down into their component parts. So they're often a big picture thinker, and then when a big picture thinker hits a problem, that person has a big problem, and big problems are scary. And if you haven't been equipped with the ability to chop the big problem down into little problems and deal with each bit as it comes up, you will develop this hiding mechanism. And then also that often ties in with the stigma aspect of dyslexia. So however much nowadays the idea of a different view of dyslexia, the positive view, is kind of emerging, and you can find it everywhere on the internet. But outside of Davis, there isn't much to it more than a comfort blanket.
I find that so patronizing. Right. I watched this film a long time ago, and it was made by some people here in Vancouver. And basically it was patting us all on the head saying, well, you'll be okay. We'll find something you're good at. I mean, really, it was so patronizing. I couldn't handle it.
Yeah, like, what a shame you can't read, but don't worry, nor could these people.
Exactly. That doesn't help at all.
That was just like when we interviewed Henry. He was talking about the school he went to, and that's exactly what they did. Was they just went, okay, well, you're clearly not good at English and these other classes, so we're just going to focus on what you're good at. You're going to pass, and then off you go. right?
Yeah.
It's putting floaties on your arm, allowing you to tread above water, and then off to the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the sort of the politically correct way of referring to a person with dyslexia as opposed to a dyslexic. I mean, I can understand why that happens, but then the message that you're putting across is that somebody with an affliction or with something wrong with them, as opposed to that ability to say, hey guys, I am dyslexic. This is who I am. Here's my identity. Here's all of me. And I'm going to use that as my resource. And I worked with kids using the Davis approach in a school context, where I remember particularly the parent of one extremely dyslexic girl saying to me that aside from the actual help to her literacy, that the biggest gift she felt that Davis had given to this girl was the self-confidence to say, hey, I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to go and see a teacher and say, hey, I'm a picture thinker.
Yeah.
You know, I need stuff this way. Later on, then when you leave school, being able to talk to your employer without batting an eyelid and saying, okay, I'm dyslexic. These are my strengths. These are the things I need support with or whatever.
Yeah. You know, allowing yourself to say, I'm dyslexic, it just puts more of that positive view, both for the dyslexic and for the parents and others that may meet the person. It takes away the stigma, both from the people who get to meet the dyslexic and the dyslexic himself.
But that involves the person who is dyslexic to be proud of it.
Yeah.
And what happens, obviously, is when we have kids who've taken a program and they're all gung-ho and they go back to school and they burst in and they say, I'm dyslexic, and knowing that they have a gift, they're still going to come across people who sort of say, oh, I'm so sorry.
But I think what's so important to get across to children is that everything about the way you think and learn is all right.
Mm.
And as soon as you diverge from that message, then you hit on problems. A particular case that really stuck in my mind that I refer to in the second chapter of my book was a boy who was taking a subject called Theory of Knowledge, which is a fascinating subject provided in the International Baccalaureate diploma. And you spend 2 years learning about theory of knowledge, which is all about how do we know what we know, how do different disciplines acquire knowledge and so on. Then you write an essay and you do a presentation. If you don't write the essay, you don't get your diploma. So the entire outcome of your education basically is thwarted from not doing that one essay. And there was a boy who didn't have a formal diagnosis and actually presented pretty well through the course, who suddenly just bombed on his essay. And I was the coordinator at the time of the Theory of Knowledge department. And so I was allocating supervisors, and he was sort of fobbing off his supervisor by saying, oh, I sent you the first draft, didn't you get it? And, oh, I'll have to check my inbox. And then the supervisor would say, no, I didn't get it. Oh, well, I definitely sent it. I'll send it again. And then the same cycle would happen again and again and again. And then 3 days before the deadline for submitting it, I discovered that he hadn't actually put pen to paper at all, and he hadn't started. And he thought it was the deadline because that year the IB extended the deadline by 3 days for administrative reasons, but we hadn't told the pupils because we just thought, okay, a little safety margin will be useful here. And he was a boarding pupil, and we were running around trying to get this essay out of him. And then we contacted his boarding house, and they said he's sitting in a darkened room saying he's going to fail his diploma.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was in the school that night, and so I told him to come around. We talked it through, and we made a plan. And the next morning he came into my department, and we just had a little chat, got his ideas going. We put him in a room on his own, and within 2 days he'd written an essay that then came out with a B grade.
Wow.
Yeah, which was all his own work. But that's what can happen. If we were analysing rationally that behaviour, it doesn't make any sense at all, because you're allocated a supervisor. The supervisor is there to support you, to help you get your ideas going. You need to do this thing in order to finish an expensive education with any sort of outcome. So the idea of just not telling the truth to your supervisor and shutting yourself in a room doesn't make any logical sense at all. But as human beings, we're much more governed by our emotions than we are by logic, and therefore that can happen. But tracking it back, again, I see that as a product of not developing through primary education in a way that gives you the feeling, okay, this is how I think, this is how I learn. Mm-hmm. I can put my mind into the state it needs to be in to learn. And all of the work that we do in Davis on those little words, which in the dyslexia program we call the trigger words, and in Davis learning strategies we call the basic words. Mm-hmm. All of that is giving you this building bricks around making connection and analysing things. So, something that I often ponder on, and I refer to in my book, is what happens if you're denied the opportunity to really get to grips with those little Davis words. There was a case way back. I remember one of the UK facilitators told me a story, probably about 12 years ago, of a little boy about 7 who had come to her for an initial Davis program assessment. And during the meeting, he suddenly chirped up and he said, "Oh, I know how to spell elephant." And he evidently wanted to show. So the facilitator said, "Oh, okay, how? Tell me." And he said, "Because." And the reason why that happened was because he'd been taught in school that the spelling of because is big elephants cannot always use small entrances.
Oh my goodness.
I was told big elephants can always understand small elephants.
Yeah, that children are taught as a trick to learn the spelling of because, but none of those variants get to grips with the meaning of because. And the meaning of because is for the reason that. And a reason is about something that makes something else happen. And something making something else happen is a fundamental law of the physical universe. It's the law of action and reaction. It's the law of cause and effect, of causality. Yeah? So when you don't give children the opportunity to engage with the meanings of those words, you're taking away a piece of their education that actually can give them a fundamental analytical tool that they'll then take with them. And so the way that we have all of these trigger words in Davis, because, if, why, when, whenever, unless, all of these words, by taking young children through the plasticine, using their picture thinking through a process that enables them to see what these words tell us about how we as human beings look on the world, all these little connections we're making all the time through our language, yeah, that then equips children with this sort of conceptual toolkit, if you like, that they can then take through into secondary school and kind of be wise.
Okay, so I want to just recap this for myself. It's interesting because we're obviously told that every word has a meaning, every word has a spelling, and every word has a pronunciation. And for people with dyslexia, obviously, we have to have a visual meaning for all our words. And because we're not given a visual meaning for words like the and if and of, they cause blanks, they cause the disorientation. We lose the plot when we read them. So that's one aspect. But what you're saying is that not only that, but we're actually denying them the ability to be able to, what did you call it, analyze and something when they get to senior school.
Yeah, analyze and synthesize.
Thank you, analyze and synthesize. So it's not just simply that we're not giving them the visual meaning, but we're actually denying them a part of their education, and we really are turning them into parrots, that they just literally regurgitate the information without really working with it. And that takes them to a whole different level of understanding.
Well, it does. I mean, if you look at the research into Davis learning strategies, the article that appeared in the American Reading Improvement Journal in 2001, which is on the davislearn.com website in the research section, you'll see there that the strategies were deployed with children of all different learning styles, dyslexic and non-dyslexic, potential dyslexic, non-potential dyslexic. And what surprised, I think, the researchers and even the teachers in the outcome was that when these children had been worked with for 3 years, so they had started Davis learning strategies at the age of 6, and then they were tested a year later, and then the researchers came back again 3 years later when the children were 9. They then discovered, first of all, that there had been no special educational needs referrals for many of the Davis pilot classes. So there were no children who needed extra support of any kind. But they also discovered that the gifted and talented referrals were exponentially higher than the US federal average. So the US federal average at that time being around 5%. You had one class coming out with, I think, about 40% of children on these GATE referrals, and then another class with 27%. And then even the third class, which was a socially deprived class, was coming out with 10%, which was double the federal average. And of course, what you can't tell from that is which bits of Davis learning strategies are doing what for these children, and also whether the children coming through as gifted and talented are potential dyslexics who flipped the other way and became gifted, or the non-dyslexics who just became better than they would have been otherwise. You know, you can't tell whether these are the picture thinkers or the non-picture thinkers. But globally, there seems to be some intellectual stimulation effect, quite a powerful one, from this work. My hypothesis is that it's through the work that's done on the basic words.
That's so interesting.
I want to just remind everybody who's listening, if they're not quite sure of it, Davis learning strategies are very simple tools, foundational skills, exercises that classroom teachers can learn in 2 days, and they can share those skills with every child in their class, whether they happen to have this way of thinking or not.
Encourage the teachers to stay in touch afterwards, not to go away after 2 days and never see us again. There is a mentoring process afterwards, but techniques are taught over 2 days.
And that's something that obviously we're encouraging our primary school teachers to learn these methods. And then a few times you've mentioned your book, Richard, which is called Why Tyrannosaurus But Not If. I'm just trying to bridge the gap now, because you're a Senko, you're seeing all these things happen in school, you're realizing that primary education is not giving some of the students what they need for high school, and then you wrote a book.
Yes.
Tell us why you wrote it and what is the message.
Yeah, I think the book, for me, it was my attempt to kind of bring together everything I'd learned from all the different strands I'd been involved in. So in Davis Learning Strategies, in the dyslexia program, in my work in school, and in my work in school using aspects of the Davis methods. And I think its primary purpose when I set out to write it was to explain in teacher speak what Davis is. So something I think we found quite often with the Davis message is we've struggled to get that message to kind of the wider teaching community. So very often, the resonance among parents is very strong, among grandparents is very strong. So if your identity as a parent and you've been through that journey of discovering that your child isn't learning in the same way that other children are, wondering why, eventually then getting a diagnosis and then finding dyslexia.com and then buying the book, then it resonates again and again and again. But if your journey has been a journey of a teacher where you've been taught how to teach and you've been taught key principles of learning and you've been taught how to structure a lesson, and then suddenly there's a child in the lesson who can't learn, and then you go to your mentors and then they're saying, well, that's the thing called dyslexia, and just these kids find it difficult to learn, and then it's just tough and you just need to be very, very kind to them, or, whatever. And you're also very busy because teachers are very busy. And then suddenly you get a book that says, actually, these kids whom you've not been able to teach, they're really clever. It's just that you can't teach them. I'm being a bit facetious here, having been a teacher myself, but it's not a message that's very easy to communicate. And so I wanted, having been a teacher, to kind of unpack the Davis methods and use the language and the concepts of teaching to get across what this is, and that actually to show teachers what we're putting forward here is not something that is in any way at odds with what you've learned as a teacher. This is not outlandish or strange. This is where it fits what you already know. So that was the main purpose of that book. But then as I was writing it, I also found that it was a useful book for what I like to think of as proactive parents. A parent who wants to get in there to research, to find out everything about their child's identity and experience in order to be able to support them, that my book would help those people as well. And so as a spin-off from that, we've been developing a one-day teacher workshop based around the book and a parent course, which is 6 evening classes delivered over 6 weeks. Something interesting, I think, generally about Davis in lockdown, in COVID, is how we've managed to switch a lot of our work across onto Zoom, but we've kept it very, very personal. So we haven't gone the kind of the dry webinar route where there's a chat box, but we do Zoom meetings. And Zoom has this lovely facility called breakout rooms, meaning that in my parents' course, for example, we can have a group of a dozen or so parents online, and then there's an activity, I hit a button and they all go into rooms in 2s or 3s, and so it still creates nice opportunities for networking, which I consider very important. I think any course that is designed for parents of dyslexic children, one of the functions it needs to fulfill is to create a peer support network, so that the parents get to know each other, they trust each other, and then they support each other afterwards with the common concepts that we've taught on the course. It's 2 hours once a week for 6 weeks with things to do at home in between.
Beautiful. And is that available to anybody in any country?
At the moment, we've been piloting it in the UK. So outside of the UK, it's Watch This Space, but probably Watch This Space fairly soon.
This book, Why Tyrannosaurus But Not If, the Dyslexic Blueprint for the Future of Education, is available on
Amazon is the easiest place to get it. It's in print and Kindle on Amazon.
Wonderful. I found it exactly what you said. I found that if I were a teacher, that would be totally my language. I thought it was extremely informative and something that I think teachers would totally enjoy. That is very cool. So we have a book, which in actual fact we could send to teachers who are a little bit trepid about, a little bit nervous, if you like, about completely going into Davis Learning Strategies.
There's also a free course, and that's available worldwide. So if you go to whytyrannosaurusbutnotif.com, you can imagine we had to fight tooth and nail to get that domain.
Such a popular one.
An abbreviated one is whyty, whyty.co.uk. That forwards across to whytyrannosaurusbutnotif.com. You then just click on, there's a tab at the top that says the free course.
Oh, okay.
And you can sign up. We just want your name, your email address, and the country you're in. And then you can get your free course, which is simply 15 emails from me that come once a week for 15 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So the course is mainly designed for teachers, but again, proactive parents have found it useful. And I designed it in such a way that each email, you can read through it in about 2 minutes, because teachers are busy people. But then at the end of it, there are links and there are things to try out with your pupils and so on. So you can take it as far as you want to.
That is amazing. We'll put that on our website if we may. That would be fantastic. Because as you say, teachers are loaded up to their gunnels, and they really do need something short and sweet.
Well, it seems like some places are picking it up more than others, like New Zealand.
And Iceland and Holland and India. You've been involved in India, haven't you, Richard?
Yes, I have. I've only been involved on the edges of Davis learning strategies in India, but there are some extremely exciting things going on there. There's an inspirational school in Chennai called the Lalaji Omega Memorial International School, where two of our wonderful facilitators, Priti Venkatasan and Nirupama Krishnan, have done incredible work there. They have a section in the school called the Indigo section, which is a section of basically the picture thinkers. And they have gone kind of all guns blazing with Davis learning strategies in that section. They've got fabulous results from it. They've had huge numbers of their teachers train in it. And so Priti and Nirupama are now presenting workshops in the school. And Monique Geven, who's a Dutch facilitator based in Denmark, was absolutely dedicated. She did incredible work out there. I think at one point she spent something like 60 days in the school and visited every single class in this huge school of about 4,000 children, I think. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That is very, very encouraging. Very encouraging. Richard, what would you like to leave us with? What thoughts do you have?
Well, I think there are different messages to different people, aren't there? A message to a busy teacher, because I have been an incredibly busy and a very stressed teacher in the earlier stages of my teaching, is if you can invest in strategies that really produce independent learners, then your life will be easier. So one of the great advantages of Davis learning strategies, it's a gradual transfer of responsibility from the teacher to the pupil. And the pupils are responsible for creating the curricular resources. No more scrunching around the photocopier with all of those handouts and so on and so forth. We come in with a simple principle, a basic idea. The kids get out the clay and they make what they need to learn. And your quality of life as a teacher goes up.
The tools that the Davis learning strategies provide, the release and the focus and the dial, they're totally self-management tools. And over here, we're calling them self-regulation tools. And the point is, if the children manage themselves, then the teachers don't have to manage them. And the teachers can't manage them anyway. What you're saying with independent learning, are you saying, like, for example, if you introduce a subject like geography, you can model the meaning of geography and then the kids just take it and fly?
That's what Omega schools have done in Chennai. If you go to Davis Methods in India on Facebook, you'll find there's some really interesting photos in there that Priti has been sharing of geographical concepts being mastered in clay. And I've been around the school and I've seen that happen. It's inspirational.
Again, for listeners to know that we're slightly digressing from the basic Davis learning strategies, the tools, the alphabet, the reading exercises, and then mastering words. But what you're saying is the teachers are then able to take this even further and just master any concept, any word, any project heading. And that's the part that I've loved doing with some of my students.
If you've given a kit that works, why put it back in the cupboard? You know, I mean, keep using it.
Well, we've mastered geography, we've mastered physics, we've mastered chemistry, we've mastered trust. We've done all sorts of things which have been, in my view, so powerful. And if they had given me the meaning of physics when I was at school, I would have enjoyed it. But quite frankly, I hated science, which was a terrible shame. They told me that chemistry just meant you mix two things together and see what happens. I can do that, right? Yeah. But they didn't. They told me to stick this in that and watch this and like that.
Yeah, and then same with history. You know, what is history? It's the study of because in study, cause and effect in communities of individuals.
It really is.
It's the baseline.
But when you have that baseline and you have an image, then any information that is given to you, you can stick onto that image.
Build from there.
So that's one of your messages to the busy teacher, that the independent learning is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the message to parents would be trust in your children's ability to learn. The people that your child needs are not the people with the right answers, but they're the people with the right questions. Because the answers are inside of your child, they just need to be drawn out with the right questions, which is what the Davis Facilitator essentially is. It's a person with the right questions for your child.
And that to me is the difference between teaching and facilitating. It's like teachers push in the information and facilitators pull it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel that many teachers want to do that? I mean, I see some fabulous teachers who will do anything to reach their children. But I also see teachers who just want a worksheet.
It is so difficult. We as Davis facilitators have the luxury of working one-to-one. Imagine you're working 1 to 30 and you've got several children in there with kind of challenging learning profiles. And however long you've been a teacher, and you may have got used to it, but every time you don't succeed in teaching a child something, you get the feeling of failure as a teacher every time. And so you have young teachers who are going into the system full of their ideals and all the reasons why they wanted to go in to share their knowledge. And then again and again, failure, failure, failure. And so naturally the children who are academically able, who give the teacher the feeling of success, 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 it's just really difficult to keep up morale. But the insights that you get from the Davis system will unlock so much and will give you so many answers to those unanswered questions.
I think if you're giving all this information and you know you're trying your hardest and yet the child isn't doing well, it's not taking it personally. It's not seeing that that's a personal affront to you and how you teach.
But you can't not feel it. I mean, I've been a teacher. When a child doesn't achieve at the level that you would like them to achieve at, you can't not feel it.
Yeah.
Well, you feel it as a parent too. I'm sitting here, I'm doing this with you. Why are you not doing it?
Davis Learning Strategies actually works very well when a teacher and a classroom assistant both go through the training, and then they can divide up responsibilities in the class, but they're both working with core Davis principles. And the message to children is going to be trite to say, believe in yourself. I don't want to say that. But the message to the children is there are answers. You do not need to be carrying unanswered questions about yourself with you. There are ways of teaching that will allow you to learn.
Exactly. That's fantastic. Richard, thank you so much. Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Sue and Tristan, for having me.
We could have gone on for so much longer. Maybe we can ask Richard back for another interview at some point, because he's seen every aspect. He's seen from a teacher's point of view, he's seen from a facilitator's point of view, he's seen when he went back as a teacher, as a Senko, and he's seen how important it is for students to have what they need in their primary education, particularly when it comes to meaning. And as a facilitator myself, I know why it's important to master trigger words. I know we have to give ourselves a meaning because we need a meaning to think with when we think in pictures, and no picture, no thinking. I understand that part. But to hear there is another importance, if you like, that this meaning enables children to go beyond the parrot rote memorization learning into the realm of analyzing and synthesizing. I had no idea that it would provide, as he says, that intellectual stimulus. So now I like to be able to give you the information that you might need. The concepts for life you will find at www.rdavisautismfoundation.org. Richard's book and the free course that he was talking about you'll find at www.whytyrannosaurusbutnotif.com. And the Davis Learning Strategies you will find information at www.davislearn.com. And for those of you who are in Canada, I'm hoping that we will be able to run a Davis Learning Strategies workshop early in 2021. So please do get in touch with us, the whole Dyslexic Society. That website is www.thewds.org, and my email is info@thewds.org. Next time, we will be listening to a wonderful lady called Abigail Marshall, who is a wealth of knowledge, especially if you have an interest in the research. So thank you for listening. Bye for now. The next podcast will be tomorrow.